So YouTube, today I will be reviewing this keyboard, which is the Polar 65 by Arbiter. I think it looks really nice, but more so than a review of the keyboard, what I would like this to be is for me to explain why I think these types of keyboards, specifically analog keyboards, are the next big thing when it comes to input devices, at least for the world of movement and keyboards. I think we haven't seen this big of a paradigm shift in at least 5 years. I don't know. This is a bigger jump compared to a normal keyboard than any change in a mouse I have seen recently. If you're more interested about how I feel about the current world of mice and gaming peripherals when it comes to aim, look at this video up here about the GPX2, the G Pro X Superlight 2, which I've recently released. But this is a pretty big deal, unlike mouse changes. So let me explain what the difference is when you buy something like a Polar 65 or a Wooting. These are analog keyboards, specifically they're Hall effect magnetic keyboards. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that they're analog. So the big difference is when you're using a normal keyboard or a digital keyboard, what that does is you press a button, at some point you get to the actuation point, and then that clicks, and that sends an input to the computer, hey, I've been pressed. And then it knows if you're still pressing it, and then when you move up, you get to the actuation again, which is something that is physically built in the keyboard. It releases, and it sends to the computer, hey, I'm not being pressed anymore. And that's fine, that is digital input. But when we talk about analog input, that's a different class of input. Analog in general means a continuous signal. So let me give you an example, because analog inputs are not new to the world of gaming. If you play on a controller ever, you will know, even without knowing exactly why, that these buttons here, they are either pressed or not pressed, but a stick doesn't have that binary concept to it. You can move it a little to the right, a little up, fully up, etc. So it's analog. The computer is able to know how much you are moving it. Not just that, but ever since I think PS3, I don't remember which DualShock was it, the triggers here, the back buttons, the triggers are also analog, which means that unlike these buttons, the shoulder buttons are not analog, but the triggers are, which means that if you're playing a racing game, for example, if you press it more, you're going to accelerate more. If you press it less, you're going to accelerate less. So why is that a big deal in gaming? Well, it's a big deal because it allows you to do things more finely. If you're playing a racing game on a normal keyboard, for example, and you press W to accelerate, you will immediately accelerate fully. So in a game like Rocket League, that is actually a bit of a disadvantage because you are unable to, move slowly and kind of hover, which is an important thing in Rocket League because you want to slowly move and shadow the ball and stuff like that. I won't get into the details of it, but analog input adds a lot of depth to mechanics in games. Now, you might know that no FPS games actually, on PC at least, support that type of thing with a keyboard. Even if you buy an analog keyboard, you won't be able to, press your button halfway and your character will move halfway speed yet. But what you can do, which you cannot do with a normal keyboard, and that's the smart thing that Wooting did, you are able to do a couple things. Analog keyboards are not new, but Wooting kind of revolutionized because of the second feature especially that I'm about to mention to you. The first feature is a normal keyboard, a digital keyboard, you press a little bit, you get to the actuation. The actuation is always at that given travel amount. So if you want to have a keyboard that has an higher actuation or a lower actuation or more travel before it triggers, you have to buy a new keyboard. You can't really change that. That's built in the Switch. But if you buy one of these keyboards, because they are fundamentally analog, so the keyboard does know how much you're pressing one of the buttons, what you can do is you can change the actuation point via software. Or in the case of the Polar 65, there's no official software yet, there's a beta, but you can do it with combinations of keys, kind of like Zowie Mice, or Vaxi, where like you change everything by clicking things around. And by changing your actuation point, you can decide how sensitive a specific key is. A specific key. So you can choose which key is one actuation, which is actually extremely cool because it means that your WASD, you can make them very, very short actuation so that, 0.1 millimeter, basically you just slightly touch it and immediately it gets triggered. Or for other buttons that you might not want to press by mistake, maybe, I don't know, R, you don't want to mistakenly reload your gun, you can decide that the actuation is all the way down, so that you really have to commit to pressing it before it works. So that already is a big deal, because you can have the benefits of a high sensitivity actuation, which means that immediately you won't have to take the time to press the button down for you to wait to get the input in the game, which is basically latency. We can call it latency. You know, the time it would take for you to get to the actuation is time that you're wasting in game. But you can have your WASD with a low actuation, so that immediately you press and you move instantly. And that's one big deal. But that is not the biggest deal. The biggest deal, which as far as I understand, is actually something that Wooting came up with. They're calling it rapid trigger functionality. Personally, I think it's kind of a weird name. Really, what it's called is, what it should be called, in my opinion, is dynamic actuation. What it does is, imagine this. You have a switch, you set it to a very, very short actuation, so you press it and it immediately triggers. Then you go all the way down, so maybe it triggers at 0.1 millimeter, but then you go, a full millimeter or something down. And now you slightly release it up. In a normal keyboard, you would have to get all the way back up to 0.1 millimeters, so you have to release it all the way and then press it again to untrigger and trigger again the input. But with rapid trigger or dynamic actuation, what happens is, even if the actuation is at 0.1 millimeter and you go all the way down, the moment you start going up, that counts as you having lifted your finger off the key. And that is a big deal, because imagine the typical AD of strafing in a game, like Valorant or Counter-Strike, or any game really. I've been using in the finals and the difference is massive. Rapid trigger allows you to basically really finely and quickly move between A and D without having to fully lift, which actually, once you try it, you realize how annoying having to do that was, and how much precision and latency, how much it affected your precision, because it's kind of really hard to be super sharp in the way you, for example, you stutter step or you strafe out of a corner in Valorant with a normal keyboard. You try on one of these magnetic keyboards. Because of rapid trigger, it's so much easier, because the moment you lift up, you stop moving. And then you press slightly on the other one, which you might have not even left all the way up, and now you start moving, which is actually amazing. That is a big deal. And I think that is why now, with that, which is such an obvious advantage compared to normal keyboards, everyone is kind of into Wootings and such. And you can see that these keyboards have that power. I love it. I have specifically set the effect on my Polar to be, this thing is pretty normal, where you click and it lights up the RGB around the key that you clicked. But you can see that the intensity of the light depends on how much I click. So you can see that it's analog, because, the light goes like, very dim, and then you press more and it's very bright. So I really like that. I don't know right now if the Wooting or the Pro 65 is better. I haven't had a chance to try the Wooting. This was more of a video about why conceptually this is a big deal. I hope that game devs, and it's mostly engines, Unreal and Unity, will find a way to support the analog input. As far as I understand, there's no standardization yet of the analog input. Wooting has its own software development kit. I don't even know if Polar 65 has one, so it might be that I'm dreaming, but I think it would be very cool, and it would add a lot of depth to games if you could have the full analog input in the game, so that, for example, if I press it halfway, I'm only moving at a given speed, and if I press it more, I'm strafing faster, so that you can kind of really dodge the bullets, or like learn to move in a pattern that is really hard to predict. So yeah, that was it. Specifically now, getting back to the Polar 65, they have it in a number of different themes. I got this one with the Christmas deal, which was, I think, $100 or so. I don't exactly remember. I like that it has a detachable USB-C. I just use one of my USB-C cables. I think it's actually one from the Harpace. And the build quality is actually amazing. I was not expecting it for this price. It beats a lot of higher price mechanical keyboards that I've owned, for sure. I'm not a fan of the 60% format. It is a little bit annoying, especially because, as you know, I'm also a computer scientist. Maybe you don't know. So I code, and not having the F keys is kind of a pain in the ass. But I'm kind of getting used to it using FN because I don't want to switch between two keyboards, so I'm just sticking to this one. Also, I feel like I do type a little faster because of the lower actuation. Well, actually higher actuation, lower travel distance, if anything. So I've been really liking it. I think I'm gonna get some keycap sets because I'm kind of already getting bored from this set, even though I do find that it's cool. And I have tried the beta software. It's decent, but honestly, they ship it with a little card, like instruction manual that explains how you can press certain buttons to put it in basically programming mode, and you can program the little keys to do different things and actuations and such. And I think that's good enough. I'm kind of a fan. I don't play LAN tournaments anymore, but I know that would have been really cool having it in for LAN tournaments where you just go in, plug your stuff, and you don't need to install anything for it to be customizable. I'm a fan of that. So I can definitely recommend the Polar 65. I don't know if it's better than a Wooding. I will definitely get a Wooding so that I can do a comparison. But in general, if you're playing with a mechanical keyboard, wait for a deal maybe, or just pull the trigger. The trigger. And buy a magnetic keyboard because it is a big deal. It is a big improvement, and it will make your movement way sharper and faster in video games. I hope that we will see something like this in the world of gaming mice because this is exciting. This is good. It's a big change that anyone that tries one of these is going to immediately notice. That's what I meant in the GPX2 video. These changes like higher hertz on mice, you don't notice. You don't really notice. Maybe you slightly do. This, you immediately notice. Huge difference. So I highly recommend to upgrade to a magnetic keyboard. Let me know what you guys think. Have you guys tried a magnetic keyboard yet? And let me know if any of you have had the chance to try the Wooding versus this, and if you think that the Wooding is better or not. See ya, guys.